Hello everyone, my name is Colton Davis and welcome to Kalulu Talks. Today's episode is called The Things We Lost. So today we're going to be talking about various things that were present during my generation, the Millennials, what aren't necessarily present with the current generations right now. I'm talking about Generation Z, also known as Zoomers, as well as Generation Alpha, which is currently still being born, but their last ones will be born around 2025. Today we will talk a little bit about Generation X as well, and maybe even baby boomers. But for the most part, we're going to be trying to focus mainly on the differences in the transition of technology and culture from millennials onto the next ones. And the reason why we're going to be talking about that today is because I do believe it's important to understand where you come from as a culture. For example, when I was young, my father used to sit down with me and tell me about his generations. And of course, my grandfather did the same thing, as well as my great-grandfather to some degree. I believe this is very common to pass down one's knowledge from generation to generation, so it gives you kind of an understanding of where we came from. Now, with that being said, I will talk about a little bit of politics on the fifth segment as well, but that'll be toward the end of that segment. If you're on Rumble, you're getting 6 segments a day, while as if you're on YouTube, you're only getting 5. This is because I'm very happy with the fact that Rumble has been doing very, very well lately when it comes to viewer count. And I believe Rumble is definitely the platform I want to try to support the most, if it's definitely going to support me the most. Now, that's not saying you're going to be missing out on YouTube, it just means you're not going to get as much. However, I'd still appreciate it if you do like, comment, subscribe if you're on YouTube. And if you're on Rumble, please like, comment, and follow. It will help me out a lot in the long run. Now, with that being said, I don't want to take too much time because this is going to be a very long video. We're going to go ahead and name off the segment today. We're going to be talking about phones. We're going to talk about physical media. We're going to be talking about stores as well as internet things. We're going to be talking about culture. And of course, if you're on Rumble, you're going to get the 6th and final segment, what I miss the most. With that being said, since I don't want to take too much time, let's go ahead and jump into it and start talking about phones. Alright, so the reason why I picked phones to be our first segment today is because there is no doubt in my mind that phones are probably the most commonly used tool in today's time. They're used for your calculations, they're used for apps, they're used for news, they're used for clocks, calendars, etc. Heck, algebra in there, they're also used for entertainment for the most part. Phones have become so much more than they once were. When I was young, and you were out on the road, you did not have a phone you could really use. So, if you needed to call someone for emergency or whatever, you'd have to go to what's called a payphone. And you'd find these in various places. Here in the South, we had a lot of them, like near convenience stores. You'd pull into a gas station, and there'd usually always be some sort of payphone up front, usually to either the left side or right side of the store. If you weren't going to find them there, you were able to find them usually at a McDonald's. I remember McDonald's, they didn't really have that many outside payphones. They actually had payphones inside the building. When people think of payphones, one of the most stereotypical thoughts that pop in their heads is, hey, these outside booths. And although those are true, in the South, we didn't really have any indoor payphone booths. I mean, you have like some that are just hanging off the building and things like that. But as far as one you can actually walk into and close behind you, that wasn't really a thing. But we did have indoor payphones, and a lot of people have seemed to have forgotten them. Basically, they would be put in like alcoves and things like that, where you'd pull up, you'd put some money in, and you'd pick it up and call whoever you needed to call. The thing that sucked about those, though, is I believe they put you on a time limit, and I don't remember how long your extension was. But I remember that if you had a really chatty person you had to call to, it was kind of a pain in the butt using a payphone. Plus, I think they were like 75 cents at one time, but they increased in price a lot. I won't lie, I don't really miss the payphones. I used them like twice in my entire life, and when I was a little kid, and I think that was because Dad wanted me to call someone. So, personally, I don't have much experience with payphones as myself, but I do remember them being just about everywhere. I remember going to the mall and seeing the little section cut off just for payphones, and of course recently, when Dad took me and the rest of my family down to Epcot, which is a Disneyland thing. I'm not a big fan of Disney, but I figured I would go because they've been, saving up for that their entire lives. But now we go in there, go into the locker room, and in one of the locker rooms at Epcot, they do in fact have payphones still, but they're used as novelty. And that's the thing people don't seem to understand with payphones, is that if there are any that are still alive and existing right now, they're almost essentially novelty, or they're rusting away. I did see another payphone recently, and it was in front of an old convenience store down here in, I think, Claremore. I could be wrong. I drive around a lot, but yes, I drove by this old convenience store. It looked like a mom and pop's kind of place, and they had an old rusty payphone in the front of their building. It clearly does not work anymore, but this is kind of the state you'll find them in today's time. Good luck trying to find one that works, although I do believe there's like one in Berlin that still technically works, but they keep that there just as a tourist attraction essentially. Another thing that you don't really have anymore is home phones. Don't get me wrong, you can still buy home phones. I looked on Amazon when I was researching this video, and yeah, you can still get home phones today. But most people do not have them anymore. I remember growing up, and like every home, regardless of wealth, almost always had to have at least one home phone. Why? Because you cannot communicate any other way without it. This was something that was essential back in the day. And some of them things got really, really expensive. I remember my grandpa Davis, he had two home phones. He had one up in his living room, and then he had one down in the kitchen. I don't know why he had them so close together now that I think about it, but regardless of the reason, it was very common to have home phones. Most houses just had one, some had two. The more wealthier individuals might have three or four. Home phones wasn't really used as a status symbol for the most part. But I remember the first ones, at least the ones when I was young, which I remember seeing, were the ones that laid down flat. And later on, they got a little more advanced, and you could hang them straight up, and they would like stand up on themselves. And home phones were pretty cool. When I was really young, they didn't even have screens attached to them, and if they did, they were like a little strip on the side. They didn't even have the digital screens until I think I was in my teenage years, but yeah, home phones had advanced a lot back in the day, and you had them everywhere. They're also in offices. You'd find them in schools. You'd find essentially these home phones just about everywhere. But believe it or not, although we don't have home phones themselves anymore, it's the style of which they are which is gone, not really the object themselves. You'll still find these in like nursing homes as well as hospitals. And the reason why is because home phones are a lot easier to secure than your cellular device, and thus it leaves less chance of HIPAA violations. Because when you actually have the landline running through your building, you're able to control the information that goes inward and outward. So other than a few locations here in the US, you won't find these in many places anymore. It's very unlikely that you're going to go to someone's house and they're going to have a home phone still. I'm sure some of the older folks might still use them, but for the most part, it is a form of dying, kind of a dying thing, I guess you could call it. Not just that, I remember when cell phones kind of first came out en masse, and it was the flip phones, which I remember the most. Zoomers probably know what they are, but they've probably never actually experienced the flip phone. I remember they were so freaking cool when they came out. You'd open it, it was like almost like a movie thing people would do. They would just pull it out and just slide it up, and you'd hear that click. Oh, it was so weird and actually somewhat nostalgic as well. The cheap ones, though, you'd flip it open, and there's like always a small chance that it would break in half on you. It was awful. But they were cool. Flip phones were first ones, I believe, that started texting, maybe? I could be wrong with that, but I remember texting was around flip phones. You can call people on them. Some of them had games, though. Like, you can actually play games on your little flip phone. And that was really cool back in the day, because apps were not a big thing around this time period. And of course, as cell phones advanced a little more, we got more and more advanced with them. And I got to see the flip phone kind of change slowly into the flat screen phone we now know. The touch screen, I mean. And those are very popular. And I think that's going to be the design that stays from here on out. Although, because I did work in a nursing home, flip phones are still very popular for the older generation. This is something that they feel comfortable with. It took them a long time just to learn how to use this thing. So a lot of them don't want to go ahead and advance their way up to a flat screen phone, especially those who are in the silent generation. Flip phone suits them just fine. With that being said, though, I also want to mention one thing before we go into our next segment, and that's that phones before apps were a big thing. And when I say apps, technically anything that's on your phone can be considered an application. But apps, as I'm saying, is that the apps which we can easily download today were not once a big thing. You were not able to download your Angry Birds on an old flip phone, for example. Um, like back in the day, if you downloaded anything, it was going to cost you a lot of data. It was going to cost you a lot of money, probably as well, if you had too much of it. I remember downloading a few games on a flip phone and then having to go buy another card for it just because I chose to download a few games, which were really not worth it anyway, because they were crap, unfortunately. A lot of the games on the old flip phones were not fun. I remember it was like this Galaga-like one, which was okay, and I'm trying to remember, there's another one that was good on there, but for the most part, there just wasn't much going on with your flip phones. There was probably some other things you could download other than games as well, but for the most part, flip phones were not a big thing when it came for apps. Apps came in later on. I would like to mention though, since I am talking about apps, is that the millennial generation, when it came to like mobile games, we had it better. I remember in high school we had the like Angry Birds that came out. We had Flappy Bird that came out, Plants vs Zombies. We had a bunch of these older mobile games that came out during our time span. Fruit Ninja and Temple Run's another good example. And back then, yes, you'd get a lot of ads with your games, but they would not bug you as much as you would now. Nowadays, you try to play a game on a phone, and you probably have an ad like every 10 minutes. It is hell. Back then, though, you might have an ad once an hour when they first started coming out, and it was freaking great. And that's a little reason why all the mobile phone craze was so big back when they first came out, was because the ads weren't drowning you essentially alive. But of course, as more and more people did ads, it lowered the value of the ads themselves, and thus they had to put more and more ads to make money off whatever it was they were trying to peddle. So unfortunately, that was going to be a predestined thing, especially with the fact that most ads, if possible, are skipped. Why? Because nobody wants to have to deal with an advertisement in today's time. Most ads are garbage. That's kind of sad to say, because if I ever did do a sponsor or something in this channel, it would be with a product that I trusted and personally enjoyed. I think a lot of people do that, because that's just kind of a comfort thing. So, on one hand, it sucks that people do skip ads, and on the other hand, I do it too, so I understand. So, yeah. With that being said, there ain't really much more I'm going to go over on phones themselves, but they are significantly different when it comes to different things. I will mention this. Millennials, they tend to use their phone a lot less now than the Zoomers do. I remember back in high school, a lot of the girls would use their phones like nonstop. Guys would use it on occasion, but it wasn't like we were just hooked to it. Anyway, um, but as time went on, I've kind of seen the millennials get away from phones. Not as much as the Zoomers, though, and unfortunately Gen Alpha as well. They really, really like their phones, and this is a little concerning to me. When you see like a small kid just randomly able to download all this stuff and do all this weird techno stuff. Um, because once again, there's some weird stuff in the world, and I just do not trust children with technology, and for very good reasons. And on top of that, the Zoomers who are just hooked on them, you'll be working somewhere and you'll see a Zoomer essentially just playing on their phone when they're supposed to be doing their job. This is common nowadays. And it's so weird to see that we've become such a technologically dependent people in just one generation. And I think it was bad when we millennials first got it as well, though. And hopefully it's just an age gap thing and they'll grow out of it. But so far we're not seeing that with the Zoomers. Which means we're probably going to become even more technologically dependent on cellular devices as time goes on. I think the big thing with cell phones from the transition of millennials to Zoomers was YouTube culture, social media, things like that. Whenever you're able to keep all your social things together on one device, that's really what kind of transitioned its phone period between the millennials to the next generations. And that's the biggest thing I've seen between the phones differences between millennials and, of course, future generations. Alrighty, so starting out our next segment, we're going to be talking about physical media. So physical media is usually forms of media that you can physically touch. Things that are like data keeping, for example. In the old days, you had like floppy disk and certain hard drives, things like that. And although we still have these concepts today, a large portion of the things that I grew up with are definitely gone now. For example, the first thing we're going to be talking about is VHS, also known as Video Home System. So when I was growing up, We didn't even have DVDs really for the most part. I mean, we did have some here and there, but it took a little while for them to fully kick in. So when I was growing up, a lot of the stuff I watched was VHSs. I remember having Shrek on the VHS. I remember having a few of the Pokemon movies on the VHS. I think Home Alone was on the VHS as well. I mean, just that was where we got a majority of the stuff we were able to watch, and it was kind of funny because they had so many different products that went along with the VHS. Because there's an entire culture just around those old films. For example, you had a machine that would actually rewind these videos for you, and they would do it at like ridiculously fast speeds. You'd pop it open, you'd throw it in, and you'd close it. Now you could also rewind them, however, on the VHS player. But the reason why I mentioned that is because a lot of people do not remember the old VHS rewinder we used to have back then. On top of that, they had like machines that would actually like record your screen as well back then, and you could get VHS tapes that way as well. Although I think they stopped doing that because it was kind of kind of piracy if you think about it. And it was funny because I remember that old culture so well, and it was very cool to have old VHS tapes. And it was kind of interesting to see the transition between the VHS to the DVD. And I talked to a lot of old people, and they're mixed on it, like especially the Gen X. Half of them think it was a ripoff at the time. The other half think it was good. For example, if you're just coming to see the movie, you don't want to see any of these special features or anything like that. Obviously, DVDs are not going to be a big selling point, especially with the fact that not all DVDs even have all those extra features anyway. The biggest thing with the DVD, in my opinion, when you look at it from that angle, then, would be the scene selection. Able to select the scene and can go just straight into wherever you're at. Thing with the VHS, though, is that they tended to be a lot cheaper way back when. Like when DVDs first came out, the VHS typically was cheaper, but it also took up more space. So it was like, do we really want this kind of thing going on here? But other than that, they also had like different sizes of boxes as well, so you couldn't really get a good library shape with a VHS for the most part. While as with DVDs, you almost always had a similar shape and size to your DVD boxes. I think there's a Simpsons series that kind of broke that rule though. Kind of a haha. But other than that, growing up with VHSs were very, very cool. Some of my better memories at like the video rental place was with the VHS area of renting. Another thing I want to mention before we actually go into a deep dive of CDs and DVDs is I want to mention cassette tapes. When I was young, although we had CDs around, a lot of people, because this was during the transitional phase between cassette tapes and CDs, still used cassette tapes. I remember when I was a kid, too young to drive, Dad would listen to a lot of old heavy rockers with his cassette tapes. I think he had some Led Zeppelin, some like Kiss, some like Metallica. So he would pull out a cassette tape, he would put it in the vehicle, and he would play it that way. And just like a VHS, you had to rewind it if you wanted to hear it again. At least I believe you did. I'm not sure. It's been a very long time since I've used cassette tapes. And they were very cool though, because you had different ways of using them. You had radios you could buy for your house, and that's something else we don't have anymore is radios. I mean, sure, they do exist still. And, like, mostly in your cars, however. Like, I used to own a blue radio, which I would put into my house. Well, not my house. It was technically my mom's house. But I would put it in there, and I would turn it on and just listen to whatever. Usually I preferred going for the CDs, but if I couldn't find nothing interesting at that moment, I could turn on just a normal, FM or AM. And it was very cool back in the day. It was kind of hip too. Like if you were to go into the city, you'd see boomboxers as well. They weren't as prevalent in the millennial generation, but people just walking around with radios for whatever reason was the thing people used to do. Pocket radios were a thing as well, but those were more prevalent in like the 80s, I believe. And yeah, so radios were big, and they were almost reliant on the cassette tapes during this time frame. But of course, when CDs came around, they easily killed off the cassette tapes. A lot of people enjoyed CDs much better. For one, it was a lot easier to get wherever you needed to go. You can just restart a song from the beginning instead of having to rewind it. They seemed to be faster. They made a better sound. If they got scratched, though, you would have issues. I remember the biggest issue with the CDs was if you got a really bad scratched up CD, good luck hearing much of anything anymore with that. You would skip a lot of places. They're still cool though. And the cool thing with CDs is that they didn't always have to really just be centered around music. I mean, technically, you could argue cassette tapes didn't have to be, centered around music either. But I think it was more common for CDs to be more different than just normal cassette tapes. You would definitely have more comedy acts and podcasts, early podcast like things with those. Plus, CDs was kind of a new kind of era. And I remember people literally just handing out their CDs saying, hey, you want to hear my music? Please support a local band artist. Like, people would just hand these things out like candy. It was insane. And there's actually CD stores as well. I mean, I'm pretty sure there's cassette tape stores as well. But CD stores would also carry those old cassette tapes and memorabilia from that time period. So CDs, in my opinion, were definitely a positive, transition. However, when we get to DVDs, this is when things get a little controversial between the previous age groups as well as with the millennials. Is that DVDs, although offer the potential chance of advancing with various things, image quality is one. You could definitely get a clearer image through most DVDs than you could with VHSs. But the thing with DVDs is that just like the CDs, they had the same issues. They're a lot more brittle than your old cassette tapes. For example, if you get scratched up too many times, your DVD would be ruined. In order to destroy a cassette tape, you would have to either destroy the film itself or pretty much smash it. And for the most part, even like dust particles can ruin your DVD if you're not careful. Um, VHS though, I do remember one time, for whatever weird reason, our VHS recorder or player, my bad, would actually eat our VHS tapes. So I'm not going to say that they were all good. There was definitely nostalgia there, but there were definitely problems with it as well. But you don't see VHSs anymore. You don't really see cassette tapes anymore. And CDs are essentially on the deathbed at the moment. Like, there are more and more stores. I think recently Best Buy stated that they aren't going to be holding CDs anymore, if they haven't gotten rid of them already. And it's like more and more people are getting rid of CDs. This is due to the fact that you can carry more music on your cloud than anything else. Like, straight up, why have a bunch of CDs around when you can carry them all on one device? Now, I think that's dangerous on one hand by replacing your physical media with digital media, because if ever the company what owns that, because they sell you licenses, they do not sell you the product itself when it comes to digital, and they've always done this even when you had the physical copy. But the reason why they didn't really do anything about the physical copies is one, they can't really hunt down every single physical copy in existence, and two, it's kind of a hassle for them to actually approach your door and say, hey, we legally own the physical copy of this, you only have the license to use it, can we have our physical copy back? That would have been a pain in the butt for them, so they never really did that. However, in today's time, because it is digital, they have way more control. And one fear people have is that these people will pull the plug and you lose all your assets, essentially. Because when you're buying a license and they can pull the plug at any time, you have no guarantee that you will keep your music or your videos or whatever. Which kind of brings me to the last point, DVDs themselves. Um, DVDs are essentially made out of the same thing that CDs are. In fact, I believe some of them are actually ran off of a CD-ROM themselves, or even a DVD-ROM. I think it goes both ways with the CDs and the DVDs. I could be wrong. Fact check me on that. But DVDs were definitely something we had seen at this time period come to rise in popularity. It would actually get eventually defeated by Blu-ray. It took a very long time though. People did not want the transition between DVD to Blu-ray. I remember there was a big pushback against it when I was young. So Blu-ray was essentially a new type of disc that was supposed to be even more graphically appealing than that of DVDs. However, when I compared the two, yeah, there might have been a difference in graphics, but slightly. It wasn't really enough to make me want to get rid of DVDs and replace it with Blu-rays. So that was a pretty interesting time period because, once again, the people who had invested in VHS a long time ago for just the movies did not want to feel like getting scammed again because they were already on the notion that we got scammed the first time going from VHS to DVDs, and that they were going to get scammed once more by going from DVDs to Blu-ray. With that being said, though, another thing that I've noticed a lack of, and this is going to make some people laugh, is books. And yeah, I'm going to say it. We had more books as millennials than Zoomers do now, but books are already on the dying end of things when we millennials came into the picture. And a lot of this had to do with the fact that more and more people were investing in other forms of education and media. Television, for example, had a lot of nature documentaries, which, by the way, you should not invest your knowledge off of a screen. You should definitely have some sort of library. Physical books do allow you to do your own research a little bit. So that is something you kind of want to take a look at. Um, but another thing with books is that I've noticed that we have less encyclopedias now. We don't really have dictionaries lying around as much as we used to. And of course, you don't have many thesauruses either. Like a lot of the things that we had way back when, which you'd find in almost every household, is definitely gone. Heck, even for religious people, you'll notice that they don't really carry Bibles as they once did. They definitely more so hang on to like the apps and stuff. And it's very, very weird to see that everybody's just slowly but surely getting rid of books. Which is a shame because I personally like books. Now, what's just funny about that is that when I was growing up, I hated books. I started liking books recently now as an adult than I did when I was a kid. But now that I'm trying to build a book collection before I essentially go extinct, it's kind of very, very fascinating to me to see that we are leaving the physical media era. And I think the degradation of books is always guaranteed just because we can now hold data in other means which are more convenient than the books themselves. For example, is it easier to hear someone like, I don't know, Morgan Freeman read you the Bible for a digital device versus your own mind reading the Bible for you for your own brain? Yeah, I think more people would prefer the Morgan Freeman one, I'm just saying. A smooth voice definitely does get it over than some crunchy redneck dude speaking over in the internet. Now, the next thing I want to mention is video games. Video games are definitely no longer physical anymore. We're seeing a time period. I mean, there's still some, like the Nintendo Switch is still there, and of course your PlayStation 4 is still there. But we are seeing more and more people getting rid of the physical media when it comes to video games. And it's very fascinating to me. So growing up, I got to see the Super Nintendo, the 64, and probably most importantly was the PlayStation 1. They transitioned from being like little cartridge games to being, CD-based games. And as I was watching the transitions of these time periods go, we eventually started having more and more digital downloaded material. I think it really started off with like the cell phone stuff, as well as the flash games, which we'll talk about later on. But as more and more people were able to download off the internet, eventually Valve came out with something called Steam. And I believe the Epic Game Store came out as well, and that was pretty big for a time being. And people started downloading games off these websites more frequently than they would, on the buying with cash at a normal game store. This would actually end up hurting the sales of both Game Exchange and GameStop, which we'll talk more about in the next segment. And it kind of pains me to say it because I used to be a big time video game collector. Now I've kind of converted to the dark side. I do a lot more digital downloading on my games now. But back in the day, like that was all the rage, is having a physical copy of a video game. And with Gen Z, they don't have physical copies as much as they once did. And the idea of collecting ain't really that big either when you can just emulate older games. And that brings me to the last thing we're going to talk about before I move on to the next subject, and that's going to be the plug and play. Plug and plays were an old system you could probably buy in a value section, and they were like these little games with AV cords next to them, and you'd plug them into your TV, and you'd have a game right off the bat. And I say plug and play because that was, I think, the brand name as well, but I also want to mention other things like this which you could also do which aren't here anymore. UB Funkies is a good example. Who here remembers UV Funkies? Let me know in the comment section. But like straight up, they're not around no more. You had physical media which you had to actually physically have to be able to plug into a system and play with it. And although UB Funkies is not a plug and play, I get it. The reason why I'm putting that there as well is because it's a perfect example of things that we no longer had that once required a physical form of media. Nowadays, all these things are gone now. Good luck finding a plug and play, for example, in today's time. Although I think we still have them, they pop up on occasion. We do not have them as much as we once did, and it's something I believe that is dwindling in the Gen Z generation, and will be totally gone by the time Gen Alpha is an adult. So yeah, you won't see stuff like that no more. And I'm trying to actually figure out why physical media died, because you would think the threat of losing it from the phone call of any executive would be a reason to hold on to physical media, and some people are rebelling, some people are trying to actually hold it. And for those who aren't rebelling against the idea of digital media, they're at least trying to do archiving for the most part to keep some of this media in an area that could be accessed for research purposes. Now, with that being said, however, um, inevitability is something I like to mention a lot because a lot of things we can't control are in fact inevitable. And if you think about how humans react when it comes to the terms of convenience, I believe eventually we're going to lose physical media regardless. Why? Because the more and more less space you need to consume to have more and more things is more convenient than having to use space to hold more and more things, which could easily be replaced by a USB stick. And that's kind of the point. As technology advances and as data control advances, you do not need physical media as much as you once did to be able to house all the things you once liked doing, whether it be watching a movie, playing a video game, or even listening to music. Now, do I think this is good? I think it swings both ways. On one hand, it is convenient, and on the other hand, the person who actually owns the product can pull the plug whenever they want. I believe the right to own is something I should mention here. If we are going to go into this digital landscape where we have to own digital goods, then there should be some sort of protections given to civilians so that way if they have purchased the product, that product cannot be removed from them. A right to own should be allowed. And I understand why corporate executives want to push back against that. It's because they don't like the idea of risking copyright. But I'm not saying that we have the right to own copyright. I'm saying we have the right to own the product we had purchased. If that makes any sense. Alright everyone, our next segment is going to be talking about stores. So, stores were pretty cool for me growing up. I'm definitely a consumer, I'm not going to lie. I like consumerism to some extent, especially in the economic upturn. Right now, I'm scrunching for pennies though, because we are in an economic downturn. And when I was younger, the consumer culture was definitely big. I remember my mother, she would take us literally everywhere. We went to so much shopping. She loved it. Like, that was her big thing back then. And it wasn't just her. My aunts, they liked it. Dad didn't like it as much. That's kind of well, duh. But because my mother took me to so many places, I did grow up kind of having a liking to this consumeristic like nature. However, I always been trifle of trying to save somewhat money, due to the fact that if you overconsume, it's actually kind of a negative. So I'm not telling you to go out and buy. It's not a good idea. But I am saying that shopping can be fun if done right. But that being said, though, why am I putting stores here? Is it really something that we've lost? Yeah, to an extent. And if it's not definitely a thing that we've lost, it's a testimony to things that we will lose or have already lost. For example, Radio Shack. Radio Shack was the place where you went to get your radio electronics, essentially. But as radios went down, Radio Shack had to either evolve or go extinct. But obviously, if you name your store Radio Shack, you're going to be expected to store radio-like products. This is not really good. So as you know, people can literally download a radio on their cell phone now, which means the radio is essentially nearly useless. If you do have a radio, it's usually probably from novelty. You do have a radio in your car still, but that's the exception, not the rule. And because of this, Radio Shack did not do very well within its last couple of years. I remember going there once, looking for like a microphone, thinking, yeah, Radio Shack sells radios, but surely they sell something else. But I go in there, not a single microphone in the entire store. And this is where I kind of got an idea as to why Radio Shack died. It pushed all of its efforts on just a couple of products that were either radio or radio-like, that it was kind of doomed to fail to begin with. But that being said, though, it's just kind of Radio Shack is just here in my notes as a perfect example of like what can potentially kill a store before it grows up. I don't really have much affinity toward Radio Shack. I've only been there a few times in my entire life. But with that being said, another store that Zoomers aren't really going to have anymore is Sears. Now, Sears was a store kind of like Kmart, Target, Walmart, etc. It was a convenience store, essentially. Or a grocery store. My bad. I don't remember if they actually sold groceries, though. It's been a very long time. But it was a big store you would go into and you'd buy a bunch of product. That is something that ain't around anymore. When they started dying off, though, malls also started dying off, which we'll talk at the end of this segment. Because malls, in my opinion, are very, very crucial for a pro-economic, pro-consumeristic society. Another thing I want to mention is Kmart. Kmart, you don't have many of these anymore in the U.S. There are still a few. I'm sure Kmart will not go totally extinct in the millennial generations, But Zoomer generation, Kmart might actually not be around, and if it somehow survives there, it may or may not go extinct during the Alpha generation, because I do not think we have many Kmarts left. But there was once a time when Kmart was one of the big dogs when it came to consumerism in this nation. It had a good look to it. The stores were pretty spacious. A lot of people had a lot of positive things to say about Kmart. But the thing that really killed Kmart, in my opinion, is probably the fact they weren't able to keep up with their rivals' prices. I think Walmart is a perfect example. A lot of these big stores, like Sears and Kmart, they were slowly but surely pushed out by their rival Walmart. It was only really a matter of time, because the more Walmarts opened up, the more competition was pushed to the side. A lot of people don't really understand how much damage a Walmart actually does to the local community until they actually live it. And Walmart is a behemoth when it comes to retail. And I actually don't even know how Walmart pulls it off, because Walmart is a huge building, on average, and it pulls in a lot of truckloads of resources every single day, which needs to be unloaded enough to keep the warehouse at least somewhat emptied, while at the same time have the staff being motivated enough to be able to work over what they need to do to be able to keep their products on the shelves, as well as being able to assist the customers as they are needed. With all that responsibility for a store that size with a retail chain this large, it actually scratches my head. I do not know the secret that Walmart does. But somehow, Walmart's been able to push out almost all their major competitors out over and over again, to the point that I would even argue that Walmart is more of a monopoly than it is any form of normal business. So if you want to know why Sears and Kmart's dead, it's probably because of two things. One, bad business decisions, and two, Walmart exists. Which brings me over to the next one, Bed Bath & Beyond. And although they did serve mostly bed and bath products, they did go a little above that as well. I remember seeing like lamps and stuff in there a long time back. But that's also a store which you won't see anymore. Now with Bed Bath & Beyond, I don't think Walmart had much of a hand killing that one off. This one definitely seems to be more so of a Amazon thing. Because I remember Bed Bath & Beyond going down in popularity once Amazon came around. And it makes a lot of sense, because why haul a bunch of large bed products in your vehicle when you can order it and have someone else do the hassle for you? In fact, it's becoming more and more popular for people to buy the larger stuff on the internet due to actually going to the store to buy the larger stuff yourself. Some stores have actually tried to get around this, such as Lowe's. I believe they'll try to deliver it to you as an incentive for you to come to the store and buy from them. Because otherwise, people have gotten to the habit of just ordering it from Amazon, because it's a lot easier to get it delivered to your house that way instead of having to, go to the store, lug it in a truck or something, and then bring it all the way back to your house, especially if you don't know anybody who has a truck. I'm sure that's not the only thing that killed Bed Bath & Beyond, but I mention that here because this is something that Zoomers probably will not have in their lifetime. And if there are a few Bed Bath & Beyonds left, I get it. There will be a few, but it's definitely straggling for the most part. Another store we don't see anymore is Toys R Us. When I was a kid, I remember going to the store probably like 9 times in my entire lifetime. I was not a big Toys R Us fan, but Dad would take me there on occasion. I remember always looking at their video games section, because this was the era when video games were definitely more popular. It was like the PlayStation 1 transitioning to PlayStation 2 era. And they didn't have a very good selection. I do remember their selection being kind of crap. And at this time period, kids were not playing with toys as much as they were back in further generations. The golden age of toy stores was definitely the Generation X. Millennial generation, not so much. Now, do kids still play with toys? Technically, yes. But I've noticed over the years that they are playing with less and less physical toys. This is due to the fact that video games are more immersive. And of course, phones exist, and we are giving phones to children now. I don't think this is a good thing. It's actually pretty bad. I don't know if toys are really a good thing either, because they distract them in another form of escapism. But at the same time, I would argue having physical toys would probably be healthier than having a bunch of video games as well. Not saying there's anything wrong with video games. I grew up with video games and I turned out just fine. But at the same time, I could very well be the exception, not the rule. Another store that next generations aren't going to have, and this one made me upset, just because of convenience. Payless shoes. Now me, I avoid going to Walmart whenever I can. So when our local Payless shoe store went out of business, this one kind of made me a little angry. Because now, if I have to buy a new pair of shoes, there's literally only one store in town that has shoes that I can buy, and that's Walmart. Because I've never been a big shoe store fan. I don't go crazy for shoe retail. But like, if I had to choose between a Payless shoe store or a Walmart, I would choose the Payless shoes, definitely. But of course, time is uncruel, and they did file for bankruptcy, I believe, and they are out of business now. I don't know what exactly led them to that point. I'd probably need to do some research on it. But it seems to me that having big stores like Walmart or Amazon able to hold all your products you might need in one location is kind of the key. I've noticed that more and more of these individual stores that just hold individual products, they seem to go out of business relatively easily compared to other types of stores. This brings me to the ones that kind of break my heart a little bit. Game Exchange. Game Exchange is still around. The Zoomers can kind of sort of experience it in a few locations, but for the most part, it doesn't really exist anymore. There's not as many of them as there once was, and there was a time when Game Exchange was probably the biggest game store branch that there was. I remember when I was in my teenage years, in my preteen years, that this was the rage. Everyone wanted to go to Game Exchange. It was the big store that you had to go to. But unfortunately, when GameStop came out and they offered all those deals, they actually killed off Game Exchange for the most part. And it's kind of weird because there wasn't really that many game stores to begin with during this period. Most of your stuff would have to be bought from like either a independent game store or from like a Walmart. So Game Exchange was kind of the escape from that system. GameStop comes up and somehow, some way, pretty much monopolizes the market. And although we still have a Game Exchange here in town, I do know for a fact that there is not that many of them left, and we're very fortunate to actually even have one. But that being said, I don't really have much sympathy for GameStop. They killed my favorite game store, essentially. So I'm kind of happy that they're going out of business, but right now we still have a GameStop here in mass. Zoomers will get to experience it. The reason why GameStop is on the notes is because Generation Alpha will not. So GameStop is going out, slowly but surely. I don't see any way that they can turn around and save their company. And unlike Game Exchange and all these other stores, I know very well why they went out. So they were given a second chance thanks to Redditors. I believe everybody invested in stocks with them a little while back, and this actually saved their company. However, GameStop, instead of using this opportunity to try to go in a new business direction, they chose to invest in NFTs when NFTs were going down. It's almost like they wanted to go for bankruptcy. It doesn't make sense to me. So they're going to go out. GameStop is essentially done. They're going to turn into the new Game Exchange where there'll be a handful here and there alive, but they'll be surviving off of the memory alone, essentially. Next one is going to make some more teary eyes people, I'm assuming. So we're going to talk about Blockbuster Video. So what was Blockbuster? Blockbuster was an old retail chain, which was very popular here in the U.S. I think it was one of the biggest ones. I was not a big Blockbuster fan, but I did go there once or twice in my life. Pretty cool, not very good deals though. A more favorable one to me was Hollywood Video. We had a Hollywood Video nearby in Ulaga. It lasted for a little while. But the thing with Blockbuster, Hollywood Video, and even Family Video, I'm going to throw that in there as well. And I'll talk more about Family Video in a moment, because it kind of comes up in prominence after all the major brands kind of died out. But when it comes to video rental stores, is that they died because of streaming. YouTube, Netflix, things like that killed the old video rental stores. Plus, the quality of videos itself has went down within recent years. I don't think it's any surprise that Hollywood hasn't made a good movie in some time. I mean, it's all crap these days. So it's like, if all you have to put on your shelves are either old movies everyone's already seen, or unfortunately crap, people aren't going to be interested. So we started seeing these video rental stores. They started going away one by one. I think Blockbuster is the first to fall. Soon after was Hollywood Video. And Movie Gallery came next, actually. And that one hurt me because that was my favorite movie rental place, was Movie Gallery. I remember some of my best moments because we had a movie gallery when I was growing up living with my mother in Collinsville. And it was on Main Street. So you'd go down there, you'd go into your movie gallery, And the reason why I liked movie gallery so much was one, it was usually a small store. Sorry about that. And you'd go in, you'd pick up a movie, or you could rent a video game. Now, this was the time period when I was very big on video games. So you could rent a video game, you could buy some popcorn, some candy, things like that. But what made Movie Gallery cool was that Movie Gallery had a very cool aesthetic, and they had phenomenal customer service. Blockbuster Video, Hollywood Video, they were cool dudes, but it was a different kind of culture. Movie Gallery supported a more family-oriented culture, and for someone who was young renting video games and stuff, that was going to apply more to me. Plus, it was close enough that me and my buddies could go down and hang out in that area, so Movie Gallery was pretty fun. But that being said, around this time period, Redbox came a thing. This was when Netflix first started coming out. And a lot of them were kind of dying down because Netflix was hitting hard. I think Blockbuster had already declared bankruptcy at the time. But something called Redbox showed up. Redbox was essentially this little stand you can go to, and you could rent a video from this little stand. It was like a vending machine for video rentals. It was weird. It was relatively popular, but it was just taking advantage of a dying industry. And it was also around this time that Movie Gallery kind of went over, the edge, and they went out, and Family Video came. So Family Video is a video rental store which came in the local area around the time Movie Gallery left. And I don't know why Family Video came around this time period when all these other video rental stores was going downhill. But I think they played on the nostalgia factor that all these video rentals was gone and you weren't going to be able to see them as much. And there is one, and before I go too far into Family Video, Blockbuster still technically exists. There's one left in the world, but it's only opened because of nostalgia reasons. It's not really functional anymore outside of that area. Family Video though is now going out, essentially. I saw an abandoned one while I was taking a joyride a little while back. It was in a little small town not far from here. And seeing it, I kind of pulled in and I just kind of looked at it for a moment because it was kind of like nostalgic almost. Kind of sad as well, knowing that this era of going in, hanging out with friends and family, renting a movie is kind of gone. Especially nowadays that you can see as many movies as you want if you have a streaming platform download, Hulu, Netflix, something like that. And because of the Hollywood being so crappy now, why even watch movies? Most people just stream stuff on YouTube and stuff because the amateur made stuff is kind of better than dang Hollywood stuff. So yeah, so video rental, that's gone. That's something that the future generations are going to see at all. Zoomers might have got to experience the tail end of the video rental era, but they definitely are not going to see it as they're adults. And of course, Gen Alpha, they're not going to see it at all, unfortunately. The last thing I'm going to talk about, because I know this segment was probably a little boring for y'all, is malls. And this one hurts me the most, because this is the area where I actually adored the most. I won't lie, I absolutely loved malls. We had a couple malls in Tulsa, and every chance I got, I would definitely go there. We had so many stores, so many things to look at, so many things to buy. This was back when the American economy was really, really healthy too. And the food courts were amazing. I'm going to have to take a drink of water here real quick. A lot to talk about. But yeah, so malls were very cool. I remember wanting to ride the escalators up and down. It was crazy. We had an elevator in the mall too. It was just very good culture. I even took a few of my girlfriends back when I was younger down to the mall. It was a great place to go. It was nice. I liked malls, and I still do to this day. I actually went to visit a mall. That's where I bought my Nintendo Switch at. A few months back, actually. And it was cool just to kind of see where it's at now compared to when it was when I was younger. And I've noticed that malls are becoming more decrepit over time. You see, in the old days, if you went to visit the mall, it would be loud. People would be everywhere. And on the busiest days of the year, they would be like shoulder to shoulder. While as now, not so much. I mean, there's still a decent amount of people here. The mall we have in Tulsa is still relatively healthy, but I can tell it is going downhill slowly but surely. Also, I noticed that high-end stores are really the only ones that are still open. Back in the day, you could have a store for just about everything, but now if it's not fashion, it's probably not going to be open. This is because they've been losing a lot of demographics thanks to Amazon. And a lot of people in the Tulsa area, if they do go to a mall, they're looking for clothes essentially only. And there's always been a lot of clothes stores and malls. It's always been popular. But unfortunately, you just don't got all the extra stuff all these other demographics would have liked. We used to have a tiki store in one of our malls. Like, people sold tikis for crying out loud. And that's gone now. There used to be like hardware stores and stuff in malls. Like, it was literally something for everyone. Like, you could take the family to, grandpa could buy some tools, dad could buy some martial arts stuff, I would buy some video games, sister and mom would do whatever they wanted to do. Cousins, if we brought them over, you better believe they're going to the redneck hunting section. It was cool. And it's just kind of sad for me to see that malls are going away. So let me know in the comments down below if you're also upset with malls going away. Because that is one thing that kind of makes me a little upset. And if you look here at the image I got posted for this video, there's like an old dude just standing in the middle of this AI image I generated of this old abandoned mall. That's going to be me in like 30 years when I start exploring abandoned malls for like YouTube content or whatever. Mostly just because of this era to me was so freaking great, and it's essentially dead now. But if I keep on this topic, I'll be getting too nostalgic. We need to continue going. The next category is going to be internet things. Now, why am I saying internet things? Well, for one, as a millennial, I got to enjoy one of the best golden ages of the internet. It's the one advantage that millennials, in my opinion, actually got to have. They grew up in an era where the internet was actually still considered the Wild West of the internet, and it was very, for the most part, restricted. I can tell you so much things about this. Like, I could have literally made a video on internet-related things from this era alone. But it's not just millennials. If you're the youngest of the Generation X, you may have also experienced the golden age of the internet because you came up around that time period. However, the Zoomers and, of course, the Generation Alpha, I'm sorry to tell y'all this, no. Your internet sucks. I'm not even going to be apologetic on it. Like, they've censored things so much and have monopolized so much of the internet now that if you do anything unique on the internet, it's literally going to be from just a handful of companies over and over again regurgitating the same information. Well, at one point, the internet was so large and so vast, there was so much crap you could do on it. And now it feels somewhat small. It's weird. Because the internet has the potential to be massive, but unfortunately, it does not feel massive anymore. It feels very, very small. If you want to go to social media, for example, you're going to go to Facebook. If you want to go watch a video, you're typically going to go to YouTube. That's currently changing, though, I've noticed. So hopefully it continues changing, because I don't like YouTube having a monopoly on that. If you're going to go buy something, it's usually going to either be on eBay or Amazon. More than anything, probably Amazon. Back in the day, we had Craigslist. We don't really have that anymore. I think it might still exist, technically, but it's something you don't hear people talk about as much as they once did. Video games, you don't really have the Flash games sites. Back then, Newgrounds was pretty popular. You had Student Beans, you had Andy's Life as well, just areas where you could go play various games. A lot of things just aren't available anymore. So when we talk about internet things, I'm talking about the internet as a vacity. And the first thing I want to mention, actually within our internet things category, is going to be internet cafes. Now me, I've never really experienced the internet cafe lifestyle, but I know my sisters have, and I know my aunts have, and I know a few of my cousins have. So to be nice, I am going to talk about the internet cafes to an extent. The most popular one is still around, and probably will be for some time more, Starbucks. It was technically considered an internet cafe, and it probably still is. So believe it or not, if it's the behemoth that I think it is, it might actually be around for a very, very long time. But back during the golden age of the internet, you would find internet cafes everywhere, and hipsters loved them. I remember when the avocado toast thing became pretty popular. It was a big hit for the hipsters to go to an internet cafe. But that was because back during the golden age of this period, that if you served avocados, the hipsters would come. Kind of a joke there, but you know. But yeah, internet cafes were really big. This is one thing you will not see in the other generations. Zoomers, you probably don't see that many internet cafes other than Starbucks. And if you do find an internet cafe in today's time, it's probably a mom and pop store, believe it or not. And of course, for Generation Alpha, if Starbucks is still around, you only have one, because I'm pretty sure not many internet cafes will be left by the time you get to that point. By the time you get to that point, they'll just be called coffee shops. And the reason why is because almost everybody has Wi-Fi on their phone now. You don't really need an internet cafe anymore like you once did. Some people still need it, true, but not really as much as they once did. And that was the thing. Back in the day when Wi-Fi first came out, you needed special ports to be able to actually have Wi-Fi. This changed over time, but back in the then, you actually had to rely on an external source to be able to do your Wi-Fi. Nowadays, with satellites being so good, you can have Wi-Fi just about anywhere in certain locations. Another thing I want to mention that our generation had that you do not have to suffer through is dial-up internet. A lot of people found it annoying, but after missing it for so long, I will sometimes actually go turn up a YouTube video and just listen to dial-up. I know, crazy. But when you miss something for so long, you do kind of want to hear the screeching, awful noise that is dial-up internet for some weird reason. I'm joking. Being overly caffeinated, though, is something I am right now. But yeah, that's pretty much what it was. It was the thing which the memes are all about, talking about that really loud squeaking sound, which would be used to turn on your internet almost all the time. Another thing we had in our generation, and you still technically have it now, Zoomers, but it doesn't really function anymore. It was one of the first, what they call it, forum websites. It was called Something Awful. So Something Awful is something I do advise you to research because it is very important to internet culture. So Something Awful, when it came out, it was pretty much just a place where people would shitpost each other over and over again. It really did kind of spawn the shitposting culture, but a lot of other cultures kind of came from this one website. For example, the first internet memes, as we know them, actually came from Something Awful, and it spread to the rest of the internet. So you can thank this website for the Uganda Knuckles, essentially, as well as like Pepe and things like that. Because although those were made probably outside of Something Awful, the concept that were made from did in fact come from this website. They were also creepypastas, for example, also was originally kind of created from Something Awful. And we've always had creepypastas, don't get me wrong. Ever since the internet has been around, there's always been somewhere where you could read horror stories on the internet. But what Something Awful did is it popularized the creepypasta genre, which then spread to the rest of the internet. So I think it was Slender Man 2, the one that actually came from Something Awful. That's what really got it started. Now, I'm not going to go too much into the Something Awful history. There's a good documentary on the internet. You could probably watch it. I recommend doing so. Because Something Awful is, in fact, truly something awful. And the reason why I mention that is because I really don't have much to say. It was an important part of our culture, but it's kind of like the black sheep that you don't really want to mention too often. So, Something Awful. Although the website still exists, you can still check its functions, probably even watch a few of the old animations that are on there. For the most part, it is functionally dead. Nobody really does anything with it anymore. And in my honest opinion, I hope it stays that way. I kind of want to be able to post this video to both YouTube and Rumble for the most part, so I'm not going to go into detail as to why I'm trying to be edgy on this, but various bad things, what I really cannot mention on YouTube, happened on this website. So please definitely research this, because it would spawn 4chan. The descendant of Something Awful is the website known as 4chan, which popularized even more different memes, adding even more meme culture. One of the biggest ones being Pepe the Toad, as well as, or is it Pepe Frog? I don't remember. I'm not too big of a memer. But it also influenced what was known as Wojak culture, which is a meme which talks about modern day cultures, such as Workies, Wojis, and all that. Other than that, I think 4chan would ultimately spawn Reddit as well, and then ultimately kind of breed into Discord. So a lot of the websites we have now were actually a direct descendant from Something Awful. And although it would not be the production of the thing we're going to talk about next, some aspects of it definitely influenced its production. Because next we're going to talk about MySpace. Now MySpace is something we had in my generation that your generation does not have. And MySpace was very cool. In my opinion, it was the superior Facebook. But of course, Facebook, being the monopolistic giant it is, ultimately killed MySpace. To be fair, though, MySpace would probably have done the same thing if it was given that chance. So what was MySpace? MySpace was very similar to Facebook. It was a place where you could post things, you could talk to each other back and forth, etc. But it had better things for your pages. For example, you could put music on your pages. You can stylize it a lot more. With Facebook, I think the best you can do is put like an icon up there and maybe a banner, but MySpace was definitely superior when it comes to that ground. Um, and it got done dirty. I believe Facebook did something very dirty, which kind of took it out of the ball game. But other than that, it is definitely something that technically still exists, but just nobody uses anymore. Heck, I don't even know if MySpace is owned by the original owners or not. With that being said, we did have a better YouTube in my generation growing up as well. So early YouTube, and for the Zoomers out there who didn't get to experience early YouTube, and for the Generation Alpha, which probably won't even be watching this video until like 10 years later, because you're too young to understand what's going on, early YouTube was so freaking cool. There was so much you could do with it. There was less restrictions, so you had more freedom of what you could post, and the amateur stuff was great. And I often see people criticize early YouTube when they do try to give like a, what you would call it, a fair assumption, a non-biased argument. They like to kind of joke around with the early stuff, but you got to understand the early stuff was actually what made it more wholesome than it is now. Because now YouTube is almost toxic the way it's portrayed. This is due to the fact that YouTube does not allow for any different types of conversations or even styles for that matter. You're more likely to get clicks on what has been tried and true because YouTube has an algorithm which will divert views essentially to what they want to be viewed, which allows people who have already been made in YouTube to be more successful. For example, if I post a video, I'll be lucky if I get 15 or so views. Why? Because why send views my direction when you could send views to Markiplier's direction? Or even the other big YouTubers. Not saying that there's anything wrong with them. In fact, I enjoy a lot of the big YouTubers. But it does go ahead and show you that YouTube has essentially monopolized their own platform to the point that they now control their own platform. I'd argue if that's even considered a platform at that point, or if they're just publishers and they're glorifying themselves. So that is an argument that can be made with that. But early YouTube, although it was essentially known for cat videos, and of course triple rainbow or double rainbow, whatever you called it, it was a lot more free and there's a lot more things you could do with it. I think one of the worst decisions that company did was sell it to Google. Google has definitely destroyed YouTube the way it used to be, and like I said, we are starting to see finally other video platforms come out, and slowly but surely they are weakening YouTube, and I believe YouTube will not last forever unless it reverts back to what made YouTube great in the first place. Because unfortunately, I do not think we're ever going to see a website like early YouTube ever again. It was designed in a way that allowed anyone to do anything they wanted and have a fair chance of being seen or even grow. At the same time, though, I can't bullshit YouTube too much because YouTube was, in fact, a pretty good website when it did make the change. Why? Because it influenced the idea of monetization. Nowadays, you can actually make a living while doing YouTube, or well, not just YouTube, but any type of video-related service, thanks to the principles and the concepts that YouTube introduced. But this also killed the idea of early YouTube. So now, there are certain priorities you have to make if you want to try to work on a platform for the sake of making an income. Which is pretty interesting, but it does kind of control the type of content that you will be able to see. Whether that's good and bad, it's kind of up to you to decide. But that is definitely something you'll not see probably ever again. Unless someone tries to replicate a early YouTube concept. Now the question is, could you find a way to monopolize it? Well, not monopolize, but monetize it. And if you monopolize it, I won't like you. We've already seen what one video streaming monopoly did to the internet. I don't want to see another one. Another thing I want to talk about is GeoCities. So, GeoCities was a website. I think I might have even loosely mentioned it in the last video we did here, like the last big one. GeoCities was a website where you could make a page, or even a website. I'm not fully familiar with it, but basically, you could advertise your own stuff on there. You could go ahead and make a chat room if you wanted to. You could do essentially whatever you want, blog posts, whatever. Some people just made GeoCities just so they can say they made a website. It was kind of clout as well. It was a pretty cool thing. I'm not 100% sure why it died down. I think it still technically exists, but it's actually expensive now. It ain't like what it used to be when I think anyone could do anything they wanted with it. And thus, you just don't see GeoCities like you once did. It was cool though, because it was the early form of the internet which allowed people to be able to bounce from one page onto the other page very easily. And it's something that the new generations will not get to experience either. And when I was little, I didn't get to experience much of this because I wasn't really big on the GeoCities thing. But it's kind of shameful because after I found out that this was a thing, this is something I probably would have definitely been into. There's another thing that this generation really doesn't do what the millennials did was web surf. What is web surfing, for those who don't know? Web surfing is a thing you would do for fun because remember the internet at one time was a lot more varied, a lot more larger than it is now, at least when it comes to concepts. Like people could literally post anything on the internet and you could bounce from one topic to the other, to one chat room to the other, and they would call that web surfing. Web surfing was whenever you would go to a website, you would experience it, and then you'd go immediately to another website to experience that as well. You could research random topics. Basically, you would search a topic, go there, do whatever you wanted to do there, and then go on to the next one. A lot of people who are into like learning things were very big into web surfing, and bloggers were very big into web surfing as well. I mean, I could argue that gamers were also into web surfing because some flash sites will have stuff what the other flash sites didn't. But essentially, that's how web surfing was. You were surfing the web looking for information which could benefit you. Web surfing ain't really a thing anymore, though, because now we've kind of grabbed everything we wanted and put them into just a handful of spaces. And I think this is actually a big negative because it kind of allows for monopolies to grow into these areas. A little bit of this has to be done as well when we mention not monopolies, but algorithms. One of the internet things I want to mention is that we had a lack of algorithms back when I was growing up, back during the millennial generation. A lot of people don't realize how much control algorithms actually have over the internet, but they're so strict that they can control literally what you see and view on the internet. It can make certain websites disappear. And there's experiments you could do, which I think is extremely fun. And you'll find out that algorithms will give you thousands of searches, but only like 64 pages of information. And then they'll start repeating information to you instead of giving you all that search data. Why? Well, some people argue dead links, and that might have a thing to do with it. But personally, I think it's the algorithm doing what it's programmed to do to get you to see the websites that it's programmed to get you to see. Thus, it's making a situation where there's really no freedom on the internet anymore. And it's gotten so bad that people have made theories on it, such as the dead internet theory. I'm a firm believer of dead internet theory. I'm not so much on the AI stuff yet, maybe in the future, but as of now, I'm more so on the algorithm side of things, on what I think is true about the dead internet theory. I think to the point that algorithms have came and taken over to the point. But I shouldn't be coming onto this topic too much, because we're really just talking about the things we lost. Yeah. I'll save the dead internet stuff for a future video because it does get complicated. But basically, algorithms and things like that have actually controlled what you can see and do on the internet to some extent. Now, with that being said, the next note I have down is flash games and animations. So, we don't really have flash games anymore. We lost them around the time Zoomers came in. And basically what happened was Adobe Flash, it decided to update its systems. And it did not require Flash anymore. Now this was a pretty bad time in history, at least to people who grew up with Flash, because that meant all your old Flash games you wouldn't really be able to play without a Flash engine. I believe Newgrounds offered a Flash engine, so you could get around it for a little bit. And some people started archiving Flash games like crazy. And the thing about this, though, is that once Adobe announced that it was going to end Flash, it also ended an entire generation of the Flash animations. which, if you grew up in the early internet, were really big on Newgrounds. A lot of artists and even YouTubers and various other types of media influencers got their start in both Flash games and Flash animations. And we had a lot of cool Flash games back in the day. We had Crush the Castle. We had The Last Stand, I think. Um, we had a lot of them. There were a lot of fun ones. I think Pandemic, actually, the really popular one you can play on Steam at the moment. The original Pandemic was a Flash game as well, I believe. I could be wrong, but I think I'm right. And that's another thing, Newgrounds. So Newgrounds still exist, but people don't use it as much as it once was. It is a form of dying media, unfortunately. I don't know how long Newgrounds is going to stay on the internet, because it's still used to this day, but it's definitely dwindling from what I've seen. At least from the amount of people who know about it. Newgrounds was very, very popular way back in the day. And it's something I enjoyed a lot, but it wasn't really something I enjoyed a lot until surprisingly after high school. It was one of those things I was late to the party to, because I was playing Flash games through other websites for the most part. But other than that, we had another big one, blogging. Straight up, blogging was so big when I was young. All the soccer moms blogged. I know I'm making fun of soccer moms, but that was also something we did as millennials. And they liked blogging. Like, blogging was very big back then. People would go and they would just make blogs after blogs after blogs. And me, I would actually go from chat room to chat room, and I'd sometimes read blogs as well. So, I don't know, maybe I'm guilty of this as well. But any topic you wanted to be mentioned, there's probably a blog for. Blogs were just so big back then, and it wasn't hard to get into blogging at all. Blogs are nowhere near as popular as they once were. It has definitely been overcome by the YouTube and of course Facebook and things like that. People are more into the short form of reads anyway. Um, and yeah, that's something that we definitely lost is the blogs and of course the chat rooms. Nowadays, if you want to go to a chat room, it's almost essential to go either to 4chan or to even Discord. Sometimes Reddit. A lot of people avoid Reddit for good reasons, though. Heck, a lot of people avoid 4chan for good reasons. But yeah, chat rooms now are essentially what's going to be found on Messenger. And it's not really a chat room if you think about it. So yeah, so chat rooms are something that's dead as well. And I want to mention another thing that definitely is not around anymore. Something called Freerider. Freerider was a game what came out before Happy Reels. And a lot of people, they know what Happy Reels is. Zoomers know what Happy Reels are. I doubt that Generation Alpha would be a big fan of Happy Reels because I don't think it would be popular all the way through. But when it was my generation, Freerider was the big one. A lot of people liked Freerider. But once that style of gameplay changed and Happy Wheels came into focus, Freerider pretty much disappeared. So that's something which I was very upset with. And I'm just mentioning that because it was like, aha, not Freerider, man, come on. That was a cool one. But other than that, another thing that this generation probably doesn't really know much of is a game called Crush the Castle. This was something that was on the internet, and it's definitely gone now. And yeah, Crush the Castle was the original Angry Birds, because Angry Birds, it stole its concept from Crush the Castle. And yeah, that means Angry Birds is technically a clone of an old Flash game. So, you're welcome, world. Alright, I'm going to mention one more thing about the internet, which is different now compared to what it is later on. Well, back then, my bad. It's hard to talk when your throat gets dry. That's what I've noticed. I do apologize if I'm having to take a lot of pauses, but I'm just getting through it. So, last thing about the internet, before we move on to our culture section, is that it was the golden age when I was growing up. Definitely not around anymore. I mean, it's still around technically, but as I know it, it is not around as much as it was back then. We had so many things that are now gone, and almost everything you can take care of literally on like 4 websites. Like if you want to buy something, go to Facebook Marketplace. Don't go to Craigslist. If you want to order something though, maybe something that you couldn't get from your local community, go to Amazon. Want to listen to music? Spotify. Why go to a bunch of different amateur music places when you have one website for all of it, both amateur or pro? What about podcasting? They also have it on Spotify. What about video streaming? You got YouTube. Want to do it live? Go to Twitch. I mean, that's kind of how the sentiment is on internet culture today. While back then, there was just so much more options. You could make websites. You had less competition. While at the same time, there were more people who were interested in the more different kind of values of the internet back then. There's really a place for everyone. Nowadays, though, everybody's kind of just been hurtled onto just a handful of websites because a lot of the websites that made the internet special are essentially gone or nowhere near as relevant as they once were. Heck, there's even Neopets. How many people know what Neopets was? So Neopets was a website where you would adopt a digital pet and you would take care of it. Kind of like those old digital like Takagami pets, whatever they call them. Can't really pronounce it right. But yeah, it was a website for that. You don't even have that really anymore. And I enjoyed the internet back then. It wasn't as big as malls were for me, but straight up, it is something that I do miss from the millennial era. And I think, unfortunately, Zoomers and Gen Alpha, you got the short end of the stick. You got to experience the internet when it was already conquered. On one hand, the internet is cleaner now. Like, it was way dirtier back when we were growing up. There was a lot more nastier stuff back then, but that's because it was the Wild West. And the solution to that wasn't to conquer the internet. The solution to that was to manage it better. Because we allowed everybody to go on. I believe that there needs to be a better ID system. We need to be able to manage who and who cannot go onto the internet. And how do you decide? Well, quite simple. Are you an adult? That easy. I do not think kids should have access to the internet. I believe once you're 18, that's when you're legally allowed to go on. It's very cut and dry, I know. But it is one of the big things that made the internet great was because it was free, and once we started censoring things, once we started letting monopolies take over, that's when the internet became crap. Why did it become crap? Well, it became crap as we chose to allow everyone to get on, and then there's the issue of needing to protect them, and then there's the issue with the fact that if you protect them, it means less freedoms for everyone else. And yes, we should protect kids, but the best way to protect them is to not let them get on in the first place. Have an ID, have it scanned. That's how you should get on the internet. That's my opinion. Maybe it's controversial. But yeah, that's how I think it's gotten this bad. It's gotten this bad because of over censorship and, of course, monopolization of the internet. Alrighty, now we're going to talk about culture. And remember, if you're on YouTube, this is going to be the last segment, so you won't see the sixth one. Yeah, I go to Rumble to see that. But we're going to talk about culture. What was the difference between the culture of previous generations and, of course, this one? And I'm going to state this is, although I'm going to focus mostly on the millennial side of things, when we're talking about culture, I'm going to also talk a little bit about Gen X and Boomers. And the reason why is because a lot of American culture does transcend after the other. And this makes sense. I mean, although there's big differences with the way cultures act, their viewpoints are usually almost always the same from one culture to the next one. At least when it comes to certain things. Now, obviously, this also determines on your political affiliation between left or right. Talking about American culture has always been very difficult, especially if you're talking about it in generations. Because not just are you looking at the generation itself, you're also talking about the political generation differences as well. And because of that, instead of talking about culture as a whole, I'm just going to talk about culture as in the whole of the generation, and not by political or ideological beliefs. Why? Because if I were to do that, this video would be 3 days long. So, first things first, I'm going to state this. Music was not as good as what was in Generation X. Yep, that's right. I'm starting right off the bat by dogging millennial culture. Why? So, music, by the time we got it, it had already been sold out so much that it was just regurgitated crap. I remember when I was younger, hip-hop was kind of big a little bit. And we had some good stuff. Don't get me wrong. Like, the early 2000 music was okay to some extent. But, like, it was mostly just sellouts after sellout. By the time we got it, the only way to get big within the music industry at that time was essentially just, for record labels. And everything started sounding the same, kind of. But yeah, Generation X was probably one of the better music cultures we had growing up. Why? Well, I'll give you a hint. If you had to choose between listening to, I don't know, Green Day or Metallica, which one's going to be better? Green Day's okay, but Metallica was way, way, way better. And I don't even know if that's a fair assumption, but like, what else does millennials have? Like, even most millennials will agree, and I'm pretty sure those who are watching will also agree, that the old stuff from like the 80s and stuff was so, so much better musically. And we see this, like, there are jumps between when music culture is better than other music cultures. You go back to like the 1920s. You listen to the old 1920 music, it sounds way better than, let's say, the 1880 music. You go to the 1950s. 1950 music sounds way better than the 1940 music. You go to the 70s, it sounds way better than the 1960 music. And you go to the 80s, it just whoops it all out of the floor. I think the 80s were definitely the best when it comes to music. And I think it's because a lot of concepts, which are also bleed into the 1990s and 2000s music, was actually made and invented in this time frame. As far as music goes, modern cultures from millennials, Gen Z, as well as Generation Alpha, they're not really making anything which is revolutionizing the music industry. To be fair, Generation Alpha is still very young, so they haven't really had a chance to really work within the industry, but from what I'm seeing, it looks like we're not really doing anything new with the industry itself. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that all millennial music is bad. There are good music in there. Like, I like synthwave, I like retro wave, I like chill wave, I like the waves. They're good, okay? But you could argue that although we named it, it wasn't actually invented by us. For example, I believe the first form of synthwave music, although it didn't have a name, first appeared back in 1979. So it's like, we didn't even invent these concepts. It was definitely Gen X who actually invented a lot of the concepts which would make the music we have today. And they were the last generation when it was actually possible to start up as a nobody and rise up to the top. Nowadays, to get there, you usually have to sell out. Now, we are seeing that change a little bit. I believe it was Oliver Anthony who made that one music video, which did pretty well. Um, and we're seeing that political messaging through art is a good way of getting up there as well. So, yeah, the mold is being broken currently. So maybe Gen Z still has enough time to change the music atmosphere a little bit. But in my honest opinion, our music sucks in comparison to previous generations. Now, of course, the liking of music for the most part is subjective. But I mean, they had metal, we had screamo. You cannot tell me that screaming at a screen is actually entertaining. Well, some people might think it is. But yeah, there's definitely a difference when it comes to various music formats in modern day society. Another thing I want to mention when it comes to this generation's culture, and it's the one thing I definitely don't like about my generation. So millennials, culturally, in my opinion, were very weak. They were very strong technologically, and when it came to economics a little bit, they had some struggles, yes, but they were still within a golden age period. So to be fair, when it came to economics as well as consumerism and even internet, superior, straight up. Millennials had that down. But work ethic, culture, things like that, they were very, very weak at. You know, the things that actually matter to keep a civilization going forward. And that brings me to the next point that millennials essentially killed art. But they're not totally to blame. But I'll explain why. So, how did millennials kill art? They were the last nail in the coffin. What happened? Well, the day I knew art was dead was when a dude sold a banana on the wall for about $70,000. Don't believe me? Search it up. It's a thing. Also, it is possible to accidentally drop a glove in an art exhibit, and people now suddenly think it's a piece of artwork. Yes, millennials have become so subjective in their works of art that essentially art is dead. And yeah, we killed it because we made it matter nothing. Like nowadays, art is essentially just a get rich quick scheme. One could argue it's been going on for a while though, and I actually agree with that. Although I believe millennials added the last nail in the coffin, I am going to dog Generation X a little bit when it comes to art, because it was Generation X that did start the decline of art. Why? Because while millennials practice something called metamodernism when it comes to their artistic style, also sometimes called postmodernism, Um, Generation X. Oh, and before I go forward, yes, metamodernism has a secondary name, and it is called postmodernism. I did not stutter there. It's just post twice. That's the actual name to it. But anyway, going forward, Generation X, they were the ones who introduced postmodernism, which is almost as bad as postmodernism. Basically, this is when you start making artwork what doesn't really have an intended purpose, and you start using various things. While as post is the idea of nothing representing nothing, and that's art, postmodernism was the idea that nothing is art, but yet it usually has some sort of representative meaning behind it. Although usually being what they would call that. Being so obtuse in that angle when you look at art is very hard to explain to people what the meaning of the art piece is, and thus, in my opinion, postmodernism always kind of leads into postmodernism, which is the most useless form of art in the world. Like nowadays, you can throw a bunch of polka dots on a piece of paper and say it's art. Oh, my bad. No, that's called postmodernism. No, postmodernism is when you paint a piece of paper white and then claim it's art and somehow make like $40,000 from it. That's a thing, and it happens. And hate me or not, I don't think that's art. So yeah, Gen X and Millennials kind of tag teamed this one and killed what art is, which sucks because I like going to art galleries on occasion. So when I get to see modern art, I absolutely hate it. So what about how we focus on TV? So this is another thing about culture, which is unique. So millennials had TV culture. Gen Z, you're very fortunate. TV is kind of dying on your generation. And for Generation Alpha, if you do come back to watch this in 10 to 20 years, I don't really care. Um, you're going to be especially fortunate because TV culture is actually, from my understanding, very, very bad for the most part. You see, when I was growing up, the biggest thing you would do, but cell phones weren't really developed, was keep your face in the TV all day long. It was so freaking bad for you. Because you could be going out doing something, productive. You could go out and be building something. You could be doing something. No, you chose to sit down on your butt watching the television. And this actually started with the baby boomers, so I will criticize them a little bit. They were the ones who truly introduced the idea of TV culture. Of course, the way they did it was different than the way we did it. See, baby boomers, they would use it like for family gatherings and mealtime and things like that. And Gen X is also really bad for TV culture. They were the ones who kind of introduced the idea of cable television and things like that. I remember growing up, we first had like satellites, and they were the really big satellites for the satellite televisions, like the satellite dishes and stuff. But yeah, you can argue that millennials did have TV culture. I think statistically, millennials watched more TV than anyone else. And it got so bad that once I had the option to do so, I threw my TV out. I'd give it away to someone. Like, I got rid of it. I think television is so freaking bad for you. It's better to be able to just kind of focus your mind and just do other things. I've been happier ever since I got rid of the TV. I really don't think you need it. There's other ways you can get your information, other ways you can do your research. You don't need to be stuck on the TV. I mean, heck, if you got a computer, you'll be more constructive building things while still getting to have some levels of entertainment from time to time. So yeah, I'll argue that computers are still better than the television when it comes to at least what it can do for you. So I am happy to see that more and more people are starting to get rid of televisions. I think because over advertising as well on television networks has kind of pushed a lot of the old TV users away to the wayside. Like obviously, I went to visit my mother a few years back, and I watched television with her. But she at the time still had satellite TV, and I kid you not, a program that would have been like 15 minutes long was an hour long because there's so many ads. There's more ads than a dang TV program. Uh, so yeah, one of the things that are definitely killing TV culture right now is over advertising because it was bad in my day, and my gosh, they are really bad now. But I mean, at the same time, ads aren't worth as much as they once were. So while this actually helped the growth of other industries, this actually did kill off kind of the television industry. Not just that, with Netflix and Hulu and of course YouTube and all these other things producing for the most part better content, which I'd argue like the amateurs making like fan videos and stuff is more entertaining than the actual real Hollywood stuff. It's no wonder that televisions are dying out. But yeah, so that is one thing we had in our generation that I believe future generations are starting to lose out on is the TV culture. And to be honest with you, I'm not sad about it. I'm actually kind of glad that TV culture is kind of dying down. Ugh. There is one thing, though, I will have to give credit to millennials. And that's that we conquered our technology, but future generations got conquered by it. Millennials had a hard time going up when it came to like dealing with the technology. We were the first ones to get exposed to a lot of this rapid-paced technological advancements. It made us very lazy, and our work ethic kind of broke down a little bit. I would argue our work ethic is still better than Generation Z, and even probably going to be upcoming Generation Alpha, unless something changes fast. Um, However, when it comes to understanding the upcoming generations, when we talk about technology, I like you to look just at what the other generations are using their technology for. Millennials, they were raised to use it as a tool, and thus, as they got older, they started using their technology more and more as a tool. Hence why you have a lot more of these people doing like streams of stuff being millennials, because they're using technology as the way they were raised to use it by. Because in our perspective, technology is a tool for us to either entertain ourselves or to build things with. Well, as these other generations, because they were raised with it so close to their own growing up, as parents would literally just, and I don't know why parents do this. I guess they just don't have much of an understanding of how the world works, but parents would literally just give their kids like a VR headset or a cell phone or a Nintendo DS. And I'm not talking about like 7 or 8 year olds, I'm talking like 5 or 4 year olds, maybe even less. And it's like they'll give them this just so that way they can have some peaceful times to themselves. You know, you distract a kid and you can go and do whatever chores you need to get done, but now the kid is subjected to all the horrors that technology can bring. And this is the one thing that I've noticed, that it seems like the future generations are downright reliant on technology. Well, as millennials, although they still struggle with a lot of reliance as well, for the most part they've used technology more as a tool. For example, if there's something I don't know how to do, I don't panic about it, I just simply research it. Well, future generations, they don't really know even to do that part, but they'll try. I don't know if that makes any sense, but you put a millennial and a Gen Z in a room, one of them will be on their phone more than the other, and it's kind of easy to tell which one would it be. And I don't want to shit on Zoomers too much, but Zoomers are doing some things better than what millennials did. For one, they're more conservative than millennials. They're politically better, in my opinion, when it comes to millennials. But unfortunately, they are less prepared to deal with technology than millennials were. And that's going to bring me to my last thing. And this isn't really a culture difference when we're talking about millennial culture. This is more so just kind of a pet peeve of mine. So, like I said, I think at the beginning of the video, I've done so many retakes, it's hard for me to really tell. But I mentioned that baby boomers still have political and corporate control. Or maybe I didn't mention it. It could have been on one of the recordings I deleted. But so, let's explain this. Baby boomers. When they were young, the people who had political and corporate control of their generation would have been the silent generation. This makes sense. And this has been a thing in American culture since pretty much the beginning. The older generation will always have the political and corporate control over the younger generation. This is how it's supposed to be. One, because the younger generation does not have the resources or knowledge yet to really maintain a political or corporate landscape. However, once that generation does become old enough, they typically are then given the torch is passed down, and thus they will become the next individuals who would be owning the political and corporate landscape. This has been going on for American history for a very, very long time. However, for some weird reason, when the silent generation passed the torch down to the baby boomers, when Gen X came of age, that torch did not get passed down. In fact, in many conditions, the same people who are still in political and corporate control are the baby boomers who have been in corporate and political control since they've got corporate and political control. They have had political and corporate control through Gen X, they've had it through millennials, and they had it through Gen Z, and it looks like, because the youngest ones are 59 years old, they will maintain this control all the way through Generation Alpha. Now, is this a bad thing? I believe so, yes. Why is it bad? Well, one, The reason why, in the past, the older generation passed down the torch to the younger generation of both political and corporate affairs is because they did not understand the culture of the upcoming generations. They did not understand the technology of the upcoming generations. So it was better and more in tune to what they needed to get out of the country for the betterment of the United States by passing down the torch instead of maintaining control. However, for some weird reason, and I don't know why, and this ain't all baby boomers, alright? I'm not trying to blame or start any fights. I'm just stating, for some weird reason, this generation decided to keep control for all these other generations. And I think it's more of a negative than a positive, because we've seen time and time again that baby boomers will make really bad decisions based off of their own political and corporate cultures that they grew up with, instead of the newer ones what come around. A good example was the hearing of Mark Zuckerberg. They did not ask the right questions. Heck, they didn't even know what the heck they were talking about. I think this is the absolute perfect example of this, because this means they can be easily manipulated, and they can easily be swayed by larger corporate entities that are a part of the modern day culture. And that's a concern to me, because that means the people who have power currently do not understand the landscape to be able to properly lead. Now, that's an exception, not the rule. There have been several instances in history where a person from an older culture came in and actually fixed issues. So there can be something to be said about experience as well. But for the most part, baby boomers are not in touch with the current age of problems we are currently facing. And as a result, they only dig in deeper with the problems instead of actually fix the problems. Now, with that being said, I don't really got nothing else to talk about culturally. But I will state that if we're going to see a healthy reoccurrence of our nation, when the baby boomers do lose their power, which I think they will, because, like I said, the youngest ones are 59, so they will maintain power throughout Generation Alpha, so probably for another 20 to 30 years, maybe 40 if we're unlucky. But within 50 years, another generation will finally be able to take control. Unless, of course, there's a reverse aging pill, and next thing you know, we'll have baby boomers in political and corporate control forever. Now, I joke about that, but with technology, it's hard to tell. It advances quick these days. So when the baby boomers do leave, one of my concerns is who will take political control next? Will it be Generation X who was skipped? Will it be Millennials? Will it be Zoomers? Because at that time, logic would dictate by the time baby boomers would finally lose their political and corporate control, the people who would be most suited to be able to maintain the culture and political landscape of the United States would be the people of that culture that they were governing over. So it wouldn't be Generation Alpha, it'd be whatever generation was left after them. And that's only if the political landscape would not be controlled by other people who are now thirsty for power because they were not given the opportunity to have power. Remember, we have monkey brain. If things aren't fair, we get violent. And it's hard for me to tell what is a good decision when we talk about these factors. And it's just weird for me. But I'm not going to stay on this topic forever. YouTube, this is where I have to say goodbye to you. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And for Rumble, we'll move on to our last segment. Y'all have a good one.